Here with John Cannon, the founder of Cent Ventures. John, you have quite an academic pedigree. You studied at Notre Dame, got graduate degrees at Steubenville, Oxford, Harvard. There's a lot that you could have done with your life and a lot that you have done with your life. What is Cent Ventures and what inspired you to invest your time in that?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here. It's been in school probably more than I anticipated or wanted to, but I can share more about why maybe that happened. But yeah, also been blessed to have a lot of great opportunities over the years. And Cent is fundamentally a community that serves and tries to build up Catholic founders and entrepreneurial leaders who are seeking to build great companies and organizations, but with faith is a part of it. And it's really hard starting and building anything. I mean, you know this, you're building a practice, you're building a podcast, and it's not easy, especially if you care about your faith and your values. It can be even harder to build something because there's a lot of, there can be a lot of gravity or impetus to just like, I just got to make a buck or I got to just keep working harder. And so we really help these founders and builders, one, build companies and organizations with their values and with faith as a part of it, to have community, access to community, have access to strong, practical, strategic resources and guidance from other mentors and coaches who share their values, and then also kind of the spiritual support to help sustain the mission. I think that was the main question. Or how did I get into it too? Is that
What inspired you to start this?
Yeah, so I was my background was in business, primarily worked in banking and consulting, gone to business school, and was kind of chasing career success and kind of a work hard, play hard lifestyle. And I think existentially just wasn't happy or at peace in that. And God was really merciful with me. I had a very intense spiritual experience about a year after graduating from business school, and just was the most powerful thing I ever experienced in my life. And afterwards, I was like, God is real and I'm a sinner. And he's invited me to change. And I started tearing through spiritual books and resources and started rediscovering my Catholic faith in that journey, and ended up winding down the business I was running and entering a monastery with an order called the Carmelites, and was with them for a while. And I loved it. I was very happy there, praying about 4 hours a day, no internet or cell phone, cleaning a lot of toilets and manual labor. But as I went along, I became interested, the faith had transformed my life. And I became interested in how the faith had renewed historically, because Catholic faith is very challenged today, right? And so I studied leaders who had led new movements of renewal, like Mother Teresa, Ignatius of Loyola, St. Benedict. Like, what are their common characteristics? And just seeing that these leaders are close to God, they have deep spiritual lives, but they're also very entrepreneurial. And seeing that kind of pattern in these leaders, became interested in supporting Catholic entrepreneurial leaders, because I think these are the types of people historically that have had outsized impact on renewing the faith, and therefore probably will today and in the future. And so became interested in addressing some of their challenges and needs, and kind of painting the vision that more people can start businesses or missions or organizations with faith, and kind of try and make that more possible for people. So I ended up just starting out of the monastery and started Cent, kind of driven by that thesis, if you will.
So I totally understand if you don't want to get further into this, but I think some people in the audience, including myself, be interested to hear. Any light you can shed on the spiritual experience that you had that kicked this off?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. I mean, these things are, it's like an element of mystery and a mystery to them, and was in my life. And they're also kind of, it's very personal. They're like very personal experiences too. So it's like, it made sense to me at the time, I guess, but kind of hard to communicate. But some of the context before this, as I mentioned, I was kind of working very hard. I was, chasing a lot of kind of success goals and objectives. I wasn't really practicing faith. I mean, I was going to mass sometimes, but I never really prayed. I never read scripture. I didn't know my faith. It wasn't an operating principle for my life at all. Around the same time, my dad, who I was really close with, now he did have a strong faith life. He went to mass daily. He prayed a lot. He's just like one of the kindest, most generous souls I've ever met in my entire life. He's just he's kind of my hero and model. But he was in a really bad car accident around this time. He was T-boned, and then he was ejected from the passenger window of the car in the accident. They found him on the side of the road, like his scalp was peeled back. There was like blood on the pavement. He was airlifted to the hospital. His back had been broken, so they did emergency surgery to replace his vertebral column so he wouldn't be paralyzed. And so this like scar all the way down his back. He was in the ICU with like tube down his throat. It was really bad. And I would go visit him. Once he was able to talk again, I remember it just made a big impression on me because he was in incredible pain. I mean, recovering from this thing. But people would come in and visit him, like nurses or occupational therapists, and he would just smile at them and be like, how was your day? Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. And it made a big impression on me because I remember thinking if it was me in that situation, I would have been like, okay, how do I make this pain go away? How do I fix this? It would have been very focused on like me, but he was focused on others despite his pain. And that just worked out because I was like, how does one live that way? And looking back on it, was Christ living in him. He was very transformed by through his faith journey. I was actually thinking about that when this experience happened. I was thinking about my dad and like kind of asking myself how he was able to live that way when this experience happened. And the experience was very intense. Like I remember I was like crying. I was like, I couldn't stand. It was almost like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but maybe it was almost like the veil was peeled back in reality. And like, I could see within my soul, I like saw this like cancer within me, and it was very real and visceral. At the same time, I had this sense that like, there was something different. There was an opportunity for a life of love and justice and peace and transformation and maybe a glimpse into the reality of God in some way maybe. But I remember thinking after this experience, like, I was like, I know God exists. I know the spiritual world is real. And so I did a 180. I mean, I was just only reading I read a lot, but I would read like business stuff only, and only read spiritual things after that. That was all I would read because it was that real and powerful. I kind of, I discovered, the Catholic, Catholic mystical tradition and Catholic spirituality in that I didn't really know about before. And then kind of started chasing that and then discovered the Carmelite spirituality. And then I went and visited them, and they felt like kind of a family and a community I wanted to be a part of, and ended up applying. And about 2 years after that experience, ended up joining the Carmelites.
Wow, that's awesome in the most proper sense of the word. And I actually know what you mean. Those revelatory experiences are such a blessing. And I tend to think that someone must have been praying a lot for you to get that gift, because it's probably unmerited, if you don't mind me saying so.
No,
In
yeah,
terms of
100% unmerited. Yeah, I think that's interesting you say that too, because I've kind of, I don't know, but my dad prayed a lot for us, and I know he prayed for me and throughout my life. And, I just kind of felt, that some of that was related to his prayers and maybe other people and saints' intercession. Like it was 100% not merited. Maybe the opposite. Yeah. That's mercy, right? And
that's it. Yeah, your dad sounds like a great, a heroic man. You mentioned the leadership principles of these Catholic leaders. Can you just give us the executive summary of what do they have in common as leaders?
Yes, definitely. So I have a white paper that I wrote kind of out of this research. So if you want to check out the full version, it's on our site. It's at sendventures.com, and you can just put your email and it'll email you the PDF. It's like a 20-page white paper that kind of summarizes it. It's a little academic, but check that out. But I'll give a couple examples now. One I would say is their robust way of living the faith. They were really dependent and conformed to God. And so they took ample time for prayer throughout the day and lived the sacramental life. And that allowed them to be close to God and really transformed in him, so that the Holy Spirit is hyperactivated in their lives and really working through them. So it becomes God almost working through their lives. And that creates this dynamism in their leadership and what God wants to do through them. And so I think that's really the foundation. And one of the interesting things I found in that, I did kind of looked at over 50 of these leaders and at what point they started their kind of new apostolate or mission. And on average, I think it was around 10 years after they started really getting into I don't want to say getting into their faith, but a pattern was they joined some community, or they got more into their faith in some concrete way. Like Mother Teresa joined the Sisters of Loretto, which is an Irish congregation of missionary sisters, and she got sent to Calcutta. She was with them for over 20 years before she felt called to start the Missionaries of Charity, which became her life work. She became kind of famous and known for. And so there's a similar pattern of St. Benedict. He's living in a cave for a long time before he started innovating, quote unquote, with the monastic model and developing monastic communities. And so it was on average about 10 years after they kind of took a break and went more deeply into their faith journey before they actually started something. So there's this long gestation period where they're just kind of being conformed to God, becoming docile to how the Holy Spirit's working. And then they're often invited into some deeper mission. I think there's, especially it's probably has occurred throughout history, but I think it's especially acute today, where there's kind of an impatience around, hey, I want to do this thing and I want it now. I want to, around being in a leadership position or running something or having a certain number of followers, whatever it is, and they're doing the gritty work of letting God, deepening their prayer life on a consistent basis and letting God work through them before they're invited into something deeper. So there's that kind of consistency of building the foundation for their faith journey and relationship with God, which is super interesting, which is the foundation for their leadership and gives them the kind of ability to sustain these very hard missions or difficult things in the future. Second thing I would say is their entrepreneurial character and dimension is not so much of like, I think when we think of entrepreneurship, because sometimes we think of like somebody whiteboarding something really cool or like, kind of developing some, new tech product or innovation, which may happen, but in these entrepreneurs, the way their journeys emerge and their leadership and what they start is very organic. And what I mean by that is they often see people around them that are in need in some way, and then they help one person, and then they help two people, and then it's five, and then it's 10, and then like it starts like grow. There's a momentum to it. It's not like let me. They often don't think about like starting this big thing that's going to like change the world. It's very organic and natural, which I think is very like, it's very consistent with the gospel. Jesus sends people out 2 by 2, or just be faithful in little things, and the bigger things will be entrusted to you. An example of that would be St. John Bosco in Turin. So in the late 1800s, urbanization was occurring, civilization was continuing. So you had kind of these city areas, and you had a lot of like orphan or kids that, especially boys they were kind of street boys, and they didn't have like job opportunities, didn't have like parents or people to kind of mentor them. And so they would get in trouble a lot. And this was kind of a thing going on where he was a priest. And so he just decided like, one boy just to help. He just kind of started being kind of a spiritual father to him and giving him advice. Then he got him, kind of a job opportunity, right? And that the boy ended up like, his life ended up being transformed through that. And then he started doing it for more. And then he was like, well, what if we just have like a little school that does this? He started an oratory where some of the boys could stay and they get vocational training and spiritual support. And then that model started replicating. Eventually it became called today the Salesian order, when it became, I don't know what it is now, but at one point it was the second largest congregation in the church, in 100 years. But it didn't start like, hey, let me start this worldwide order. It was like, here's the need of a couple kids in my neighborhood. So it's also like, for us practically, it's how do we deepen it's first things first. How do we deepen our spiritual life relationship with God and in the day in and day out? And then how do we think about addressing the needs that God's putting in front of us, the human and spiritual needs? Just maybe it's one in our family, maybe it's one in our business, and just do that in an organic way. And then deeper things will unfold through that.
Sounds like the opposite of what the globalists are doing. So I'm curious if you studied the leadership of St. Josemaria. He's a saint that I've studied deeply, both on the spiritual level and on a leadership level. And I think he was an extraordinary leader. I don't know if you have had any familiarity with him. He started an organization in the church called Opus Dei. Did you happen to look into him at all for leadership?
Yep, a little bit. Yep, for sure.
So one thing that, I don't know if there's anything that stood out to you in his leadership style, but one thing that, well, go ahead. Is there something that stood out to you?
Well, I'd love to hear your insights too. I mean, you probably studied his life more than I have, but I mean, he was very entrepreneurial. He would like come up with all these different, I mean, they had like projects in agriculture and like, education and community building. And, so he was a hyper entrepreneurial, author, spiritual writer. And so just this like tremendous creative energy. But I think also it had a deep insight for like in care for like the integration of work and faith and how to be, and how to, which I think is relevant for contemporary time, contemporary times, especially for the laity, of like, how do we practically integrate the faith into our day and into our work, and what does that look like? Because everything can be sanctified. Like our sleep can be sanctified. St. Therese of Lisieux talked about, she'd fall asleep sometimes in prayer, and she was like, well, if the doctor can work on a patient while they're sleeping, so can God work on me while I'm sleeping. It's like God can work on us while we're sleeping, or St. Joseph in his dreams. And, God can work on us sleeping. He can certainly work through us while we're working, and God worked 6 days out of 7, in creating the world. So, and Jesus was a carpenter for 30 years. And so work is sanctified in so many ways, through God incarnate, through God, the creator of the universe, through present in our work. And so how do we allow God into that practically? And I think St. Josemaria Escriva has deep insights into that. Yeah. What are your thoughts? I don't know. Maybe you share some of your.
Well, so I think one way of explaining his style is to contrast it with another extraordinary church leader who's St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, whose not autobiography, just a biography I read recently. So she did a lot. She traveled around the world. She started these foundations all around the world. They were very successful. She started with nothing. Each time, it's like she started with no money. So, and then she got a bunch of vocations. So in that way, she's similar to Saint Josemaria. But the way in which they're different is, I think Saint Josemaria was extraordinary in being a leader of leaders. That he formed people who not only could take charge themselves, but then who would inspire other leaders to fill in for them, and so on and so forth down the line. And that's what makes an organization self-perpetuating and leads to exponential growth. So, and I tend to think that characteristic of forming leaders of leaders is kind of the essence of leadership. I see leadership as a leader as someone who helps another person to grow in order to achieve the good of the team. So he brings out the best in others to achieve the good of the team. And the best is to form that other person to be a leader so that they can help even more people. So anyways, that's what I find inspiring and what I try to replicate in my own life is how do I inspire not just followers, but people who can carry out the mission even to a greater degree than I could even envision long after I'm gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. What biography did you read of? Do you remember Mother Cabrini?
Yeah, it's by this guy named Theodore Maynard, I believe his name is, and it's called Too Small a World.
Okay.
I think it is the definitive biography of hers. It was written with the intention of preparing her cause of canonization.
Okay.
So it's a good one to read. Yeah, it's beautiful, super inspiring, and I think in large, yeah, I definitely recommend it. I think the recent movie was in large part influenced by that book because they have a collaboration now. So I'd be interested to hear what is your dream? What do you hope to accomplish in your lifetime, and how do you see yourself getting there?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one with anything like that, there's like a just kind of being docile to where God leads. I mean, my path has shifted in ways I would have never expected. If you asked me that question 5 years ago, it would look different than 10 years ago versus yeah. So I think one, trying to be open to where God leads it, and hopefully humble and docile enough to allow him to lead it would be the main thing. But at least as of now, I guess please God, I have the grace of joining him in heaven and being with him and bringing others with me. So I would put that as like the goal writ large, and then I guess the question then has become, what is the path for that? I guess that's something that, clarity on waxes and wanes over time, but I feel very compelled to, I enjoy and I'm drawn to see, start things, see needs or gaps and kind of try and start things that address those, and especially with respect to the faith and, sharing about the faith and helping people integrate that into their life. And I think that I'm grateful that the monastic experience I have is just, there's so much richness in that. You talked about Josemaria Escriva and others. I mean, the entire spiritual tradition within Catholicism has kind of come out of the monastic tradition, right? It's just been applied in different ways to different, audiences or people, but that's kind of the core of it, right? And so being able to help people integrate that and integrate that harmonious lifestyle into their life, deepen their spiritual life and their community relationships and relationships with others, and their approach to work and caring for themselves. Also, currently, I've been doing that through trying to serve and build up Catholic entrepreneurs, and Sent is more of a, I guess, less of it's more of like an ecosystem for Catholic entrepreneurship. So if I'm building a company or organization, I have a place I can plug into, and I can find the community. I can find mentors. I can find investing partners who share my values. I can find talent. And Sent, we're not trying to do that all of ourselves, but trying to kind of create the watering hole or develop the partnerships where that's possible. So that people, when they're building companies and organizations, they have less pressure to compromise on their values because they have the networks and the pieces in place to become saintly builders. So really helping people become these saintly builders that, like an imitation of the saints before them. So that's something that I feel like God is leading me towards now, and trying to be a good steward of that mission. Yeah.
Is there any particular challenge you face in executing this mission?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of challenges in facing that. one is, I think, the challenge of myself, and just the real tension of kind of like reliance and dependence and trust in God, and the reality of the fact that I'm on earth, this side of heaven, and I need food and water and trying to drive and push things forward. And so, like, I think that's the tension that all of us as humans face, right? And that's part of part of it is that we live by faith and trust in God. And at the same time, we're responsible for certain things, whether it's our family or our organization or a mission or whatever else. And so living that out, which is the same tension that all of the founders and entrepreneurs we work with face, is that real tension. And so, yeah, living that out in my life is a challenge, and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. And, so I think that's certainly a challenge. I think there are challenges with respect to the organization itself of being able to build something that serves people well and meets their needs, and authentically delivers the mission. I think that's another challenge this side of heaven, is that there's a mission, there's a vision for something, and you got to apply that concretely to serve people, and what that actually looks like and how you go about doing it is not always as clear, right? Same with Mother Teresa, or any of these leaders. It wasn't always super clear what, like, they had a kind of charism that was inspired, but like implementing that or on a day-to-day basis, what that looks like is there's some subjectivity and interpretation of that. And then third, I would say, like, are like the kind of, yeah, like some of the questions around, building the right, team and leadership for things, can always be challenging too.
Sure. Well, I'd love to hear either your favorite success story or the biggest challenge that you've overcome in this journey.
Yeah. I could say, like, um, I can talk about challenge. Sometimes that's easier, actually, because the successes sometimes don't feel like successes. But I would say one of the biggest challenges, when I first started this, I discerned out of the monastery right before the pandemic, and so had no, you take a vow of poverty in religious life. So I didn't really have any money. I didn't have any place to live. I hadn't, kind of just, been in the monastic situation for years, and so that's coming out and then being like trying to start an organization. It's just a very different mental framework. In the monastery, you have a schedule. It's like the spiritual military. It's like your schedule's laid out for you. You just plug and play and do that every day, and you don't have to really worry about, like, providing, like, food or earning money, or you just kind of, which is a grace to be insulated from that, especially during formation. But discerned out and then trying to start Scent, and I didn't really know exactly what I had an idea at a very high level, but I didn't know concretely what it would look like. And then COVID hit, and I was working out of my aunt's basement for by myself on this project, and people are just, most people don't return your call, or like, yeah, that's nice. It's, but not trying to get people to help or contribute in some ways is difficult. Some people did, but 90% probably don't. And it was just hard. And I remember it was a very lonely, isolating period. I it was probably the most lonely period of my life, and incredibly challenging. And I remember there were a lot of thoughts, and I don't want to call them quite temptations, but like desires to just someone hire me, let me go work somewhere. Just have like a community, or like stability. But I really felt compelled by this mission, and that it was something that I was supposed to do almost. And just kept kind of plugging away at it for years, and eventually, began to like resonate and get some traction and have some momentum. But it was a hard slog, especially early on.
Yeah, it's funny. It sounds like you had a greater detachment and poverty after you left the Carmelite monastery than beforehand, ironically.
Interesting,
But
yeah.
I'm glad that you stuck to the path, man. It's the life of an entrepreneur is exciting, and nothing can replace that, professionally speaking. You can't replace that with working for someone else. I mean, once you taste it, it's hard to go back. If you have that heart of the entrepreneur, which I can see that you have.
Right.
And
Depends on the
going through the
person.
adversity. Yeah, exactly. Not everyone does. Probably most people don't, actually. But I think I'm largely speaking to these people in this podcast. But going through that adversity, facing that rejection, you kind of wonder, am I just like too proud, thinking that I can do something great, or is this a waste of time? Is anyone actually interested in this? Am I crazy? But then inside you, there's something here, and if I can just launch it, you'll see how helpful it is, and you'll be able to help more people. And now you're starting to see the fruits of that Was there a particular turning point or breakthrough, or was it just a steady incremental growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, I think there were some like it was like in first quarter of 2020, we started a cohort with other Catholic founders, and that we kind of going to pilot and develop a model together that could be really helpful for Catholic founders and entrepreneurs, like in a cohort. And getting that going and having some momentum with that, I think was okay. This is real, and like there's some. I think that was a little breakthrough, and then we started doing more of those, and so I think those were really helpful. And then I think also like I was started just being more intentional about building my own community. After COVID kind of lifted a little bit, and I think that was and moving out of my aunt's basement, and which and be more intentional about my own community, and that was really beneficial because I think that's part of the lessons from monastic life and how God's designed us as humans too. Is like if you could have the best mission in the world if you're just working all the time. I was going to mass. I had a spiritual. He's designed us as integrated human beings, right? He wants us to have connection with Him through our spiritual life. He wants us to work with intentionality. He also wants us to have authentic relationships and community, in person. And so if that's missing, there's an existential gap within us, right? And so I think that kind of being more intentional about that was helpful. Ironically, was kind of a breakthrough for me psychologically also.
Yeah, forming the team is crucial. Once you got a good team, then it's exciting to tackle the challenges.
Yeah, the team matters so much, and something I'd always had heard before, and I just kind of took for granted. But there's a big difference between people that are fit and not a fit, and kind of taking the time and energy to over-index on that, and be patient and try to discern and find the people that are the best fit for things is really important.
Cool. Any thoughts that you want to end us with? Any exciting projects coming up or final words that we haven't discussed?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. Yeah, well, one of the things that's been interesting for me coming out of the monastery is that a lot of people have been interested in like, well, what did you learn in the monastery? What was it like? How would you apply that to this challenge I'm facing in my life? And so I've been developing some resources to kind of help communicate that. And so it's called Monk Mindset. So monkmindset.com is the website, and basically just to organize the principles of the Christian monastic tradition to make them accessible and actionable for broader audience. So you can also check out on social media the handles Monk Mindsets. And so, if you're interested in kind of learning from monastic wisdom, but in a way that is more accessible for people that don't live in a monastery, those are some resources I've been starting to develop. So I'm hopeful for that, and that's something God wants me to continue to work on and develop.
So Monk Mindset and Scent Ventures. John Cannon, thank you.
Thanks for having me here. It's been great. Yeah.